Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The forest loomed before Olga, its towering trees casting long, dark shadows that stretched like skeletal fingers over the land. The Nether Forest, or the Forest of Shadows, had always been a place shrouded in mystery and fear. Few dared to venture near it, and those who did rarely returned. Those who did come back were never the same. Their minds were fractured, consumed by terror and madness. Rumors had spread for generations of a dark force hiding deep within the forest, a malevolent presence that could corrupt the soul of anyone who came too close, but Olga was not like most people. As a guardian of humanity, she had faced threats that would drive most men to despair. She had stood before dragons, weathered fierce storms of magic, and fought against forces that could tear apart reality itself. The Council of Guardians had called her for this mission, knowing she was the only one strong enough, or perhaps reckless enough, to face the dark power that lay within. She stood at the edge of the forest, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade, the soft hum of its energy comforting against her side. The air was thick, heavy with an oppressive energy that seemed to weigh on her chest with every breath. She could feel the darkness ahead, the pull of it, whispering just at the edges of her mind. The wind stirred through the trees, carrying with it faint voices, whispers of temptation, fear, and doubt. Olga closed her eyes, centering herself, her thoughts turning to the task at hand. She wasn't just here to investigate, she was here to cleanse the corruption, to purge whatever darkness lay festering within the heart of this cursed place. Humanity's future depended on it. If the forest continued to spread its influence, it wouldn't be long before entire regions would fall under its sway. Lost to madness and despair, taking a deep breath, she stepped forward into the shadows, leaving behind the light of the world she knew. The moment her boot hit the forest floor, Olga could feel the change. It was subtle at first, a low hum beneath her feet, a vibration that ran through her bones. The trees here were unlike any she had ever seen, their bark blackened, twisted as though the life had been drained from them. The leaves, though abundant, hung heavy and limp, their vibrant greens dulled to a sickly gray. The air was damp, thick with the scent of decay, and yet there was no rot, no sign of death, only stagnation, as if time itself had ceased to move within these woods. With each step deeper into the forest, the darkness seemed to press in tighter, the trees closing in around her, their branches stretching like claws. She could feel the weight of the forest's eyes upon her, watching, waiting. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot felt deliberate, as though the forest itself was testing her resolve. The whispers grew louder, they danced on the edge of her consciousness, voices indistinct yet unnervingly familiar. You're not strong enough. You'll fail, just like before. You can't save them all. Olga grit her teeth, pushing the voices aside. She had faced worse. Her mind was her own, and she would not let the forest take it from her. Hours passed, though in the dense gloom of the forest, time became an abstract concept. The sun, if it even existed in this place, never pierced through the canopy, leaving the world in a perpetual twilight. The deeper Olga went, the more disoriented she became. The path before her twisted and turned, leading her in circles, as though the forest was alive, actively trying to confuse and mislead her. But she pressed on, trusting in her instincts, her training, and the subtle guidance of nature itself. She wasn't alone in the forest, though. Shadows flitted between the trees, shapes just beyond her vision. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but soon, she realized that the forest had guardians of its own, corrupted creatures that once thrived in these woods but were now twisted by the darkness. Wolves, their fur matted and blackened, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light, stalked her from the shadows. Birds, their once beautiful feathers turned to oily black plumes, screeched from above, their cries echoing through the trees like the wails of the damned. She encountered the first real threat when a pack of wolves finally made their move. They came at her in silence, their paws barely making a sound on the forest floor, but Olga was ready. Her blade, forged from the purest of metals and infused with the essence of light itself, hummed to life, glowing faintly in the darkness. The wolves hesitated at the sight of it, their eyes narrowing as if they could sense the danger. But hunger and madness drove them forward. The battle was short but fierce. Olga moved with precision, her blade cutting through the corrupted flesh with ease. Each strike sent a ripple of light through the wolves' bodies, purging the darkness from them, leaving only a faint shimmer of their former selves before they dissolved into the earth. But even as she defeated them, Olga couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. These creatures weren't evil, they were victims, just like the forest. Twisted, corrupted, but not beyond saving. When the last wolf fell, Olga knelt beside its dissolving form, whispering a quiet prayer. She hoped, in some way, that their spirits would find peace, freed from the darkness that had consumed them, but there was no time to dwell. The deeper she went, the stronger the darkness became. It pressed against her mind, slipping through the cracks, trying to find purchase. The hallucinations began slowly at first, fleeting images of faces she recognized, people she had lost, battles she had fought. They grew stronger as she pressed on, more vivid, more painful. Each one whispered to her, taunted her, showing her every failure, every moment of weakness. She stumbled at times, overwhelmed by the weight of the memories, but she forced herself to keep moving. The forest was playing with her, testing her, trying to break her resolve. But Olga was no stranger to pain. She had learned long ago how to carry the burden of her failures without letting them define her. Finally, after what felt like days, she reached the heart of the forest. The trees parted, revealing a clearing unlike any she had seen before. In the center of the clearing stood a massive tree, its bark as black as night, its roots spreading out like veins across the earth, pulsating with a dark energy. The air here was thick, suffocating, as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. This was the source. The heart of the corruption. Olga could feel it now, the dark force pulsating from the tree, reaching out to her, testing her. It was alive, sentient, feeding off the despair and fear that had seeped into the forest for centuries. It whispered to her, louder now, more insistent. It promised her power, strength beyond anything she could imagine. It showed her visions of humanity's downfall, of a world consumed by darkness, and offered her the chance to prevent it. All she had to do was surrender to the darkness, to accept it as part of herself. For a moment, Olga hesitated. The power was tempting. The visions were vivid, real. She saw herself standing at the head of an army, wielding the dark energy with ease, bending the world to her will. She could save humanity, stop the corruption from spreading further. All it would take was a small surrender of her soul, but deep down, she knew the truth. The darkness wasn't offering her salvation. It was a lie, a trap. The power it promised would come at a cost, and in the end, it would consume her just as it had consumed the forest. She would become another puppet of the dark force, another victim of its hunger. No, Olga whispered, her voice steady, her hand tightening around the hilt of her blade. I won't fall. The dark force recoiled, hissing as though it had been struck. But it wasn't done. It lashed out at her, tendrils of dark energy shooting from the tree, wrapping around her arms and legs, pulling her towards the pulsating heart of the corruption. The ground beneath her feet trembled, the air crackling with dark energy. Olga gritted her teeth, summoning her strength. She reached deep within herself, tapping into the connection she had with the natural world. The darkness might have taken root in the forest, but it wasn't the forest. Beneath the corruption, beneath the twisted branches and blackened leaves, the true essence of the forest still lived. She could feel it, buried deep, waiting for a chance to be freed. With a shout, Olga drove her blade into the ground, sending a pulse of light through the earth. The darkness around her screamed, pulling tighter, but she held firm. Slowly, the light began to spread, weaving through the roots of the tree, pushing back against the dark energy. The ground shook, the trees groaned, and for a moment, it seemed as though the forest itself was fighting back. The darkness surged again, trying to overwhelm her, but Olga's resolve held strong. She poured every ounce of her strength into the light, pushing it further and further into the heart of the corruption. Her body ached, her mind screamed, but she refused to give in. The forest needed her. Humanity needed her, and then, with a final, earth-shaking crack, the darkness shattered. The dark energy dissipated, vanishing into the air like smoke caught in the wind. The tree, once black and twisted, began to change. Its bark lightened, the roots retracting from the earth, the pulsating energy fading. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, replaced by a soft breeze that carried the scent of fresh leaves and blooming flowers. Olga fell to her knees, exhausted but victorious. The forest was silent now, peaceful. The whispers were gone, the shadows retreated. The once corrupted creatures had vanished, leaving behind only the faintest echoes of their presence. She stood slowly, her body heavy but her heart light. The forest had been healed, the darkness purged. Life would return to this place, slowly but surely. The trees would grow tall and strong once more, and the wildlife would thrive. Olga took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the steady rhythm of life returning to the land. She had done it. The corruption was gone, but as she turned to leave the forest, a thought lingered in her mind. The darkness had been strong, almost too strong for her to defeat. And if it had taken root here, in this small corner of the world, who was to say it wasn't spreading elsewhere? Her work wasn't done. Not yet. There were other forests, other lands, other places where the darkness might be lurking, waiting for a chance to consume all that was good and pure, but for now, she had won. And that was enough. As Olga walked back through the forest, the trees parted for her, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The sun, now free to shine through the canopy, bathed the land in a golden light, illuminating the path ahead. The whispers were gone, replaced by the soft hum of life returning to the land. As Olga walked out of the heart of the forest, her senses sharpened, the weight of what she had just faced still heavy on her shoulders. The purification of the forest of shadows had drained her more than any battle she had ever fought, yet her spirit felt lighter. But the forest wasn't the end of her journey, it was just the beginning. The dark force she had encountered felt ancient, its tendrils stretching far beyond this forest. If it could corrupt one forest, what else could it have touched? She had been sent to cleanse the corruption, and she had done that. But as she emerged from the woods, sunlight filtering through the newly revitalized leaves, the question hung in her mind, was this truly over? Olga moved through the now serene landscape, her boots sinking slightly into the soft moss that covered the ground. The trees, once blackened and twisted, were already showing signs of life. Green leaves, vibrant and alive, sprouted where there had once been nothing but decay. Birds began to return, their songs tentative, as if unsure whether the forest was safe once more, but even as nature revived around her, the whispers from the dark force still echoed in her mind. Its offer of power, its visions of a future where she could wield unimaginable strength, they lingered, creeping into the quiet corners of her thoughts. Shaking them off, Olga headed toward the clearing where she had set up her camp before entering the forest's depths. Her body felt heavy with fatigue, but rest would have to wait. The council needed to know what she had uncovered, and she needed to understand just how far the corruption had spread. The forest may have been healed, but she suspected this was merely a fragment of a larger, more insidious plan. The wind stirred gently, rustling the now living leaves overhead. A sense of calm returned to the air, but Olga was restless. She reached the edge of the forest, where the rolling hills stretched out toward the horizon, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Her small camp, untouched in her absence, sat just beyond the tree-line. The smell of earth and the distant hum of the world settling back into its rhythm filled her senses. She approached her horse, who nickered softly at her return, seemingly unbothered by the events that had transpired. Olga stroked its mane absently, her thoughts racing. The council would want answers, but she needed to make sense of what she had seen. The darkness was far older, far more pervasive than anyone had anticipated. The corruption had been powerful enough to manifest physical forces, to warp the very nature of the forest, and nearly take hold of her mind. What worried her most was how easily the darkness had offered her power, and how tempting that offer had been. The council had warned her that the forest was dangerous, but they hadn't known the true nature of the threat. They didn't understand how the dark force was capable of not just corrupting land and creatures, but of manipulating the deepest fears and desires of the human soul. With a sigh, Olga packed her belongings, securing the saddle on her horse. She needed to ride back to the capital and deliver her report. As she prepared to leave, a thought gnawed at her. If this corruption could spread so subtly, how many other places had already fallen to its influence without anyone noticing? The journey back to the capital was long, and as night fell, the soft rhythm of her horse's hooves against the dirt road was the only sound. The weight of the day's events hung over her, but Olga was not one to give in to worry without action. She would face the council, explain what had happened, and they would have to trust her judgment. If this dark force was the beginning of something larger, it was imperative that they be prepared. The capital came into view as the first light of dawn painted the sky with hues of orange and pink. Its tall, imposing walls rose up from the landscape, a beacon of safety and order amidst the surrounding chaos of the world. Olga passed through the city gates, where the guards, recognizing her insignia, allowed her entry without question. As she made her way through the bustling streets, the early morning market already alive with vendors setting up their stalls, Olga couldn't shake the sense of unease. The city was peaceful, its people unaware of the growing darkness she had encountered. She wondered how many of them would be able to withstand the temptation of the power the dark force offered. How many would surrender, convinced they were doing the right thing? The council's chambers were in the heart of the city, housed within an ancient fortress that had stood for centuries. Olga dismounted, leaving her horse in the care of the stable hands, and made her way inside. The corridors were cool and dim, lined with tapestries depicting the long history of the guardians who had come before her. Their faces seemed to watch her as she passed, silent reminders of the weight she now carried. At the entrance to the council chamber, 2 guards stood at attention. They nodded respectfully as she approached and opened the massive wooden doors to allow her inside. The council was already gathered, seated around a long, curved table. Their faces were solemn as Olga approached the center of the room. The head of the council, a woman named Lysandra, gestured for Olga to speak. "Tell us what you found, Olga," Lysandra said, her voice steady but laced with concern. Olga took a deep breath, recounting her journey into the forest of shadows. She described the corruption, the dark force that had nearly overtaken her, and the battle she had fought to cleanse the forest. As she spoke, the council members exchanged uneasy glances. The magnitude of what she had encountered was greater than anyone had anticipated. The darkness wasn't just some malignant force, Olga continued. It was sentient, calculating. It offered me power, showed me visions of a future where I could rule. And it wasn't just confined to the forest. I believe it's spreading. A murmur rippled through the council. Lysandra leaned forward, her brow furrowed. You're saying the corruption could be affecting other regions? Olga nodded. I don't know how far it's gone, but the forest was only a part of something much larger. The force I faced, it wasn't just a threat to that land. It's a threat to all of us. Lysandra sat back, her expression grim. This changes things. We thought the forest was an isolated problem. If what you're saying is true, we may be dealing with a force that could destabilize entire regions. The council began to deliberate, their voices low and urgent. Olga stood quietly, her hands folded behind her back as she waited for them to come to a decision. She could sense their fear, their uncertainty. They had faced many threats before, but this was different. This was something ancient, something that could manipulate even the strongest minds. After what felt like an eternity, Lysandra raised her hand, silencing the room. Olga, she said, we will send out scouts to investigate other regions for signs of corruption. In the meantime, you are to rest and prepare. If what you say is true, we may need your expertise again soon. Olga nodded, though the idea of rest felt foreign to her now. She bowed respectfully to the council and left the chamber, her mind still racing with the implications of what she had uncovered. As she stepped back into the sunlight, Olga felt a strange mix of relief and unease. The forest was healed, but the darkness was far from vanquished. It was out there, waiting, watching. She knew this was only the beginning of something much larger, something that would test her in ways she had never imagined. She made her way through the bustling streets of the capital, her mind already turning toward the future. The battle was far from over, and she would be ready when the time came. For now, though, she would rest. Just for a moment. But as she lay her head down, the faintest whisper of darkness echoed in the back of her mind, a reminder that it was still out there, waiting for its chance.